The stars looked different from the bridge of the UEF determination. Admiral Jinwoo Park stood with his hands behind his back, watching the endless black space through the main window. After 300 years of dreaming, humans had finally reached the stars. 12 colonies spread across different solar systems, millions of people living on new worlds. It was the greatest achievement in human history. "Sir, we have something on long-range sensors," said Captain Min-Ho Lee from his station. His voice was steady, but Jinwoo could hear the excitement underneath. "It's big, really big." Jinwoo walked over to the tactical display. A massive shape appeared on the screen, bigger than anything humans had ever built. The ship was almost 2 kilometers long, with smooth curves and strange materials that seemed to absorb light. "Any communication attempts?" Jinwoo asked. "None yet, sir, but they're definitely scanning us." Dr. Soo-young Kim looked up from her science station. She had been studying alien life for 20 years, always hoping for this moment. The ship design is completely foreign. The materials, the energy signatures, everything is beyond our current technology. Jinwoo nodded. This was the moment every human had wondered about. First contact with an alien species. Would they be friendly? Would they be hostile? Or would they simply ignore humanity altogether? The answer came faster than anyone expected. "Sir, incoming transmission," reported Lieutenant Hiram Choi at Communications. "They're using some kind of universal translation system. Put it on screen." The main display flickered and showed the interior of the alien ship. The being that appeared was roughly human in shape, but clearly not human. Its skin had a metallic shine like polished steel. Glowing lines ran across its head and neck, pulsing with blue light. Its eyes were completely black without any visible pupils. "I am Overlord Thekran of the Valeth Empire," the alien said. Its voice was cold and mechanical. "You will identify yourselves and state your purpose in this sector." Jinwoo straightened his uniform and stepped forward. "I am Admiral Jinwoo Park of the United Earth Federation. We are explorers from the planet Earth. We come in peace." Thekran seemed to study Jinwoo for a moment. Then something that might have been a smile appeared on its face. But there was no warmth in it. "Earth. Yes, we have detected your primitive radio signals for some time. A young species that has just learned to leave its home world. How typical." The word primitive hit Jinwoo like a slap. Behind him, he could feel his crew tensing up. Minho's hand moved closer to the weapons console. "We may be young compared to your people," Jinwoo said carefully, "but we've achieved faster than light travel. We've colonized 12 star systems. Perhaps we could learn from each other." Thekran's laugh was like metal scraping against metal. "Learn from each other? You misunderstand your situation, primitive. The Valeth Empire spans 3,000 worlds. We have ruled the galaxy for 12,000 of your years. We do not learn from insects." The display changed, showing holographic images that made Jinwoo's blood run cold. Dozens of different alien species, all in chains. Some worked in massive mining operations. Others were packed into transport ships like cattle. Many looked barely alive. "These are the species that thought they could negotiate with the Empire," Thekran explained, his voice filled with satisfaction. "Some tried to fight. Others offered tribute. A few even begged. It made no difference in the end." Dr. Soo-young Kim gasped as she recognized what she was seeing. "Those are sentient beings. You've enslaved entire civilizations." "We have brought order to the galaxy," Thekran replied. "Before the Empire, there was only chaos. Thousands of species fighting among themselves. We ended that chaos. Now there is only the Empire." The images continued to cycle through different worlds. Jinwoo saw cities burning, populations being herded into camps, and children being separated from their parents. Each image was worse than the last. "Now it is humanity's turn to join the Empire," Thekran announced. "You will surrender all military vessels immediately. Your population will be relocated to designated reservation worlds where you will be useful. We require 30% of your people for labor conscription. The rest will mine rare elements for the Empire." "And if we refuse?" Jinwoo asked, though he already knew the answer. "Refusal is not an option. However, if you choose to resist, we will demonstrate the price of defiance." The transmission ended abruptly. Jinwoo turned to his crew, seeing his own shock reflected in their faces. In less than 10 minutes, humanity had gone from celebrating first contact to facing extinction. "Sir, what are your orders?" Minho asked. Before Jinwoo could answer, alarms started blaring throughout the ship. Lieutenant Choi's face went white as she read her instruments. "Sir, the research station orbiting Kepler 442b, it's gone." "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" I mean completely destroyed, sir. All 847 people aboard, families, scientists, children. There's nothing left but debris. The silence on the bridge was deafening. Jinwoo closed his eyes and tried to process what had just happened. The alien ship hadn't fired any visible weapons. There had been no warning, no declaration of hostilities. They had simply erased 847 human lives to make a point. Dr. Soo-young Kim was staring at the readings from the destroyed station. They didn't just destroy it, she said quietly. They vaporized it completely. The energy required for that kind of destruction is beyond anything we can produce. Jinwoo opened his eyes and looked at his crew. These were good people, the best humanity had to offer. They had signed up to explore the galaxy, to push the boundaries of human knowledge, to build a better future for their species. Now they faced an enemy that saw them as nothing more than insects to be crushed. Get me a secure channel to Earth Command, Jinwoo ordered. Priority Alpha. Tell them we have a situation. As his communications officer worked to establish contact with home, Jinwoo stared out at the alien ship. It hung in space like a predator, confident and patient. The Valeth Empire had done this thousands of times before. They had perfected the art of subjugation. But as Jinwoo watched, something stirred in his chest. It wasn't fear, though there was plenty of that. It wasn't despair, though the situation seemed hopeless. It was something uniquely human. Something the Valeth Empire had never encountered in all their thousands of conquests. It was defiance. The aliens had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed humans would react like every other species they had conquered. They expected fear, submission, and eventual acceptance of defeat. They had no idea what humanity was truly capable of when backed into a corner. Sir, Earth Command is standing by, Lieutenant Choi reported. Jinwoo took one last look at the alien vessel. Tell them, he said slowly, that humanity is at war. 3 months had passed since the destruction of the research station. The Valeth Empire had moved fast, positioning their massive fleets around every major human world like metal wolves circling their prey. Earth, Mars, the colonies at Alpha Centauri, New Tokyo, and all the other human settlements now lived under the shadow of alien warships. President Daehyun Cho sat in the emergency bunker deep beneath Seoul, staring at the holographic display showing the enemy positions. Each red dot represented a Valeth fleet capable of destroying entire planets. There were so many red dots that the display looked like it had some kind of disease. How many ships are we looking at total? He asked General Hyunwoo Nam, the head of Earth's military forces. Conservative estimate, about 800 vessels, the general replied. His weathered face showed no emotion, but Daehyun could see the worry in his eyes. Each one is roughly the size of our largest space stations. We've never seen anything like their technology. Admiral Yoon Ji-seo leaned forward in her chair. She commanded what was left of humanity's space fleet after several ships had been destroyed trying to break through the blockades. Our weapons barely scratch their hulls. Their shields absorb our energy blasts like they're nothing. In direct combat, one of their ships can take on 20 of ours. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what those numbers meant. Humanity had maybe 200 combat-capable ships scattered across 12 star systems. The math was simple and terrifying. What about ground forces? Asked Defense Minister Ki-hyun Yoo. We haven't seen any yet, General Nam replied. They seem content to wait in orbit. Intelligence suggests they're waiting for us to surrender on our own. Dr. Yojin Song cleared her throat from the corner of the room. She was the director of the Human Military Research Division, a quiet woman who rarely spoke in meetings. But when she did, people listened. That might be exactly what we need, she said. Everyone turned to look at her. President Cho raised an eyebrow. Explain. Dr. Song activated her own holographic display showing data she had been collecting for weeks. I've been studying the historical records that the Valeth transmitted during their ultimatum. Every species they've conquered followed the same pattern. The display showed a timeline of conquest stretching back thousands of years. Species after species, all following identical patterns of resistance and eventual surrender. Look at this, Dr. Song continued. The Keltani held out for 6 months before surrendering. The Morgoth fought for a year. The Zanari tried to negotiate for 8 months. But they all did the same things. They fought in large formations. They tried to match the Empire's technology. They followed predictable military strategies. And, Admiral Seo asked, and they all had rigid command structures. They all valued honor over victory. They all fought fair. Dr. Song's eyes gleamed with something that might have been excitement. The Valeth have conquered over 300 species using the same playbook every single time. They know exactly how galactic warfare works. President Cho was beginning to understand, but they've never fought humans. Exactly. Every species they've faced has been either naturally peaceful or followed traditional warfare patterns. Large fleets meeting in open space, honor duels between commanders, surrender when losses become too heavy. Dr. Song pulled up more data. They've never encountered guerrilla warfare. They've never faced an enemy that refuses to play by the rules. General Nam shook his head. Dr. Song, with respect, guerrilla tactics work on planets. In space, there's nowhere to hide. No forests or mountains to use for cover. Who says we need to hide? Dr. Song smiled. Space is big, General. Really big. And the Valeth are spread thin trying to blockade all our worlds. They're using their standard occupation force size because it's always worked before. She brought up a new display showing Valeth fleet positions. They have us outnumbered 4-1 overall. But look at the individual systems. At Earth, they have us 3-1. At Mars, 2-1. At the outer colonies, some are barely 1-1. Those are still terrible odds, Admiral Seo pointed out. Only if we fight the way they expect us to fight, Dr. Song replied. What if we don't? Meanwhile, 30,000 light-years away, Commander Sang-hyun Yoon was learning exactly how thin the Valeth forces really were. His stealth ship Shadow Walker had been modified with experimental cloaking technology, making it nearly invisible to most sensors. For 2 weeks, he had been sneaking through Valeth territory, gathering intelligence on their true military strength. What he found was both encouraging and terrifying. The Empire was massive beyond imagination. Thousands of worlds, billions of enslaved beings, technology that seemed almost magical. But their forces were spread across such a vast area that individual sectors were actually quite lightly defended. Captain, you need to see this, said Lieutenant Jiwon Park, his intelligence officer. She was studying long-range scans of a Valeth supply depot. Sang-hyun looked at her readings and felt his heart skip. Are you sure about these numbers? Double-checked, sir. That depot is supplying the entire human occupation force, and it has exactly 12 ships defending it. Sang-hyun stared at the data. 12 ships defending the supply line for 800 vessels. It was almost insulting how little security they maintained, but it also revealed something important about Valeth psychology. They had never needed heavy security in their rear areas, because no conquered species had ever struck back effectively. For 12,000 years, resistance had always been predictable, containable, and ultimately futile. Back on Earth, Dr. Song was presenting her findings to an expanded war council. Scientists, military officers, and civilian leaders filled the bunker conference room. The Valeth think in terms of total military superiority, she explained. They bring overwhelming force to the initial contact, demonstrate their power, and wait for surrender. It's worked on hundreds of worlds. She brought up psychological profiles that her team had developed. But there's something else. Every species they've conquered had strong hierarchical structures. Kings, emperors, ruling councils with absolute authority. When the leadership surrendered, the entire population followed. Humans are different, realized President Cho. Very different. We have thousands of different governments, cultures, and military traditions. Even if one group surrenders, others will keep fighting. The Valeth command structure can't handle that kind of chaos. Dr. Song's presentation continued for another hour, covering everything from human psychological profiles to tactical recommendations. But the most important point was simple. The Valeth Empire had made their conquest strategy based on 12,000 years of success. They knew exactly how galactic civilizations behaved when conquered. Unfortunately for them, humanity wasn't a galactic civilization. They were something new, something the Empire had never encountered before. They were creative, stubborn, and completely willing to fight dirty if it meant survival. On the Valeth command ship orbiting Earth, Governor General Zenthal reviewed the latest reports from his fleet commanders. 3 months of blockade should have been more than enough. Most species surrendered within 6 weeks. Still no word from the human leadership? He asked his aide. No, Governor. Our intelligence suggests they are still debating among themselves. Zenthal made a sound of annoyance. Perhaps these humans needed another demonstration of power. He had already scheduled the integration ceremony for next month. Surely they would see reason by then. What Zenthal didn't realize was that during those 3 months of apparent inaction, humanity had been studying, planning, and preparing. Dr. Song's research teams had identified dozens of weaknesses in Valeth strategy and technology. More importantly, they had begun to understand that the Empire's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. The Valeth were so confident in their methods that they had become predictable, and predictable enemies could be defeated, no matter how powerful they seemed. As President Cho ended the latest strategy session, he looked around the room at the faces of humanity's best and brightest. These people represented every nation, every culture, every way of thinking that existed on Earth and beyond. The Valeth expected them to act like every other conquered species. They expected hierarchy, honor, and eventual submission. They were about to learn just how wrong they could be. 6 months after the blockade began, the Valeth were starting to grow impatient. Governor General Zenthal paced the bridge of his command ship, his metallic skin reflecting the lights from the control panels. Every other species had surrendered by now. What was taking these humans so long? "Any word from their leadership?" he asked his communications officer. "Nothing official, sir, though we are detecting increased chatter between their colonies." Zenthal waved a dismissive hand, probably arguing among themselves. Primitive species always fragment under pressure. What Zenthal didn't know was that those communications weren't arguments. They were coordination signals for the largest military deception in human history. Deep in the asteroid belt beyond Mars, engineer Tae-hyung Jang was putting the finishing touches on his latest creation. The workshop was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, hidden from Valeth sensors by the natural interference of the rock and metal around it. "Hand me that plasma cutter," he said to his assistant, Technician Min-soo Oh. The device Tae-hyung was working on looked like nothing special, just another piece of space debris, the kind that floated everywhere in the solar system. Twisted metal, broken electronics, the remains of what might have been a cargo ship. But inside the fake wreckage was something very different. A complete weapons platform with enough firepower to cripple a Valeth cruiser. "How many of these have we built?" Min-soo asked. "This makes 57, Tae-hyung replied, sealing the final panel. "And the other workshops have built about 200 more across all the colonies." The plan was brilliantly simple. The Valeth sensors were designed to detect active ships and energy signatures. They filtered out space debris automatically because no species had ever been crazy enough to weaponize garbage before. Ghost ships, Tae-hyung called them. They would drift through Valeth formations like harmless wreckage until they received the activation signal. Then they would come alive all at once, striking from inside the enemy lines. Meanwhile, on the colony world of New Busan, Dr. Jimin Ryu was working on something even more dangerous. Before the war, she had been an agricultural scientist, developing better crops to feed the growing human population. Now she was creating weapons that could eat alien ships from the inside out. "The nanobots are ready for field testing," she told her research team. "Each one is smaller than a virus but contains enough programming to identify and disable Valeth bioship systems." The Reaper Swarm, as her team called it, was invisible to most sensors. The nanobots would attach themselves to Valeth ships during routine operations, then slowly work their way through the organic components that made up their hulls and systems. "How long until they shut down a ship?" asked her assistant Dr. Young-soo Kang. "Depends on the size. A small patrol craft might stop working in 6 hours. A command ship could take 2 days. What made the weapon even more dangerous was how it spread. The nanobots would reproduce using materials from the enemy ships themselves, creating more copies to infect other vessels. Captain Nara Shin was testing a different kind of weapon altogether. Her ship, the Lucky Strike, looked like a civilian cargo hauler. Old, slow, and completely harmless, the Valeth patrols had been ignoring ships like hers for months. "Weapons systems online," reported her tactical officer, Lieutenant Sun-ho Kim. "Remember, we get one shot at this," Nara said. "Make it count." The Lucky Strike approached a Valeth patrol ship that was investigating a distress signal from what appeared to be a damaged human transport. As the alien vessel moved in to capture the helpless ship, Nara gave the order. Fire. Hidden weapons ports opened all along the Lucky Strike's hull. Military-grade missiles and energy beams erupted from what the Valeth had assumed was a harmless cargo ship. The patrol vessel, caught completely off guard, was destroyed in seconds. "Ghost Squadron, this is Lucky Strike," Nara transmitted. "The deception works. Repeat, the deception works." Across human space, dozens of similar attacks were taking place. Ships that looked like civilian vessels, mining platforms, or even space junk were revealing hidden weapons and striking at unprepared Valeth patrols. But the most devastating blow was yet to come. Cryptographer Woo-Jin Kim had been working non-stop for 4 months, trying to crack the Valeth communication codes. The aliens used a complex system based on biological patterns rather than mathematical ones, making it nearly impossible for conventional computers to decode. But Woo-Jin wasn't using conventional methods. He had studied the psychological profiles that Dr. Song's team had developed, looking for patterns in how the Valeth thought and communicated. "I think I've got it," he announced to his team at the underground facility beneath Seoul. The breakthrough came when Woo-Jin realized that Valeth communications weren't just encoded. They were instinctively structured. Like humans using grammar without thinking about it, the aliens followed natural patterns that reflected their rigid hierarchical thinking. "Tested on this morning's intercepts," ordered Director Hee-Jin Lee, head of military intelligence. Woo-Jin's new decoding system worked through the captured communications in minutes. Suddenly, the humans could understand every message the Valeth were sending to each other. Even better, they could send their own messages. "Governor General Zenthal, this is Fleet Commander Vorthak," Woo-Jin transmitted, using a perfect imitation of Valeth communication protocols. "Requesting immediate reinforcements at Sector 7. Human resistance is stronger than expected." Similar false messages went out across the Valeth network. Orders to redeploy fleets, reports of attacks that weren't happening, requests for reinforcements in empty space. Within days, the alien forces were chasing ghosts and leaving real targets undefended. The effect was devastating. Valeth commanders started reporting something they called human syndrome to their medical officers, a form of combat stress caused by facing an enemy whose actions made no sense. Commander Rothak of the 3rd Patrol Fleet sent a report to his superiors that perfectly captured the Valeth confusion. "These humans do not fight like any species in our records. They attack with garbage. They pretend to be defenseless and then reveal weapons. They coordinate attacks across multiple systems simultaneously, without any central command structure we can identify. Their tactics change so rapidly that our response protocols cannot adapt." What Commander Rothak and the rest of the Valeth military didn't understand was that they were fighting an enemy that had learned warfare through thousands of years of fighting each other. Humans had developed every possible form of combat, from honorable duels to dirty tricks, from massive battles to individual assassination. More importantly, humans were used to being the underdog. Every human military commander had studied battles where smaller, weaker forces had defeated larger ones through superior tactics, better intelligence, or simple determination. The Valeth had spent 12,000 years conquering species that fought fair. They had never faced an enemy that considered fairness a luxury they couldn't afford. Dr. Soo-Young Kim, now serving as an intelligence analyst, was documenting the psychological impact of human tactics on Valeth forces. Her reports made for interesting reading. "Enemy morale is declining rapidly," she wrote. "Patrol ships are requesting escort vessels for routine missions. Command crews are showing signs of paranoia and decision paralysis. Several fleet commanders have been replaced due to what their records call inability to predict enemy actions. But perhaps the most telling sign was a communication that Woo-Jin's team intercepted. Between 2 Valeth officers, "How do we fight an enemy that has no honor?" one asked. "I don't know," the other replied. "Our training never covered this scenario." That was the heart of the problem for the Valeth Empire. Their entire military doctrine was based on fighting honorable enemies who followed predictable patterns. They had protocols for dealing with superior technology, larger numbers, better positions, and even desperate last stands. They had no protocols for dealing with humans who were willing to disguise weapons as garbage, pretend to be helpless while planning ambushes, and coordinate attacks through fake enemy communications. As the 6th month of the blockade ended, Governor General Zenthal was forced to send a report to the Empire that he never thought he would write. "Human resistance is not following expected patterns. Losses are mounting. Request additional resources and new tactical guidance." For the first time in 12,000 years, the Valeth Empire had encountered an enemy that was getting stronger under pressure instead of weaker, and they had no idea how to handle it. The humiliation was too much to bear. War Marshal Drakthon stood in the center of the Imperial War Council chamber on Valeth Prime, his metallic skin dark with rage. Around him, holographic displays showed the losses from the human territories. Over 200 ships destroyed or disabled. Entire patrol fleets scattered by enemies that appeared to be civilian cargo haulers. Communication networks compromised by unknown methods. 12,000 years, Drakthan said, his voice like grinding metal. 12,000 years of perfect conquest. And now we are being embarrassed by primitives who have barely learned to leave their home world. Emperor Zethrak himself had summoned the war marshal to deal with the human problem. Drakthan was the Empire's most feared military commander, the one they called when a species needed to be completely destroyed rather than enslaved. "What do you recommend, War Marshal?" asked High Counselor Velthak. "Complete extermination," Drakthan replied without hesitation. "We make an example of humanity that will terrify every species in the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. No more games. No more attempts at integration. We show the galaxy what happens to species that dare to resist the Empire." The Iron Fist fleet was Drakthan's personal armada, 500 of the Empire's most powerful warships, each one capable of cracking a planet's crust. The fleet had destroyed entire star systems when other species showed too much resistance. Their arrival in any system usually meant the complete end of all life there. "Begin with their agricultural worlds," Drakthan ordered, as his fleet entered human space. "Let them watch their food sources burn. Then move to the industrial colonies. Save their homeworld for last. I want them to know exactly what is coming." The target was New Sol, a farming world with over 2 million human colonists. The planet grew food for 5 other human colonies and was considered one of their most important agricultural centers. Its destruction would cause famine across human space. Drakthan's bioships descended on the planet like a plague of locusts. The massive vessels began consuming everything in their path. Forests, cities, farmland, all disappearing into the ship's organic processing systems. The attack was being broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to other species. "Resistance is futile," Drakthan announced on all frequencies. "This is the fate of species that defy the Empire. Watch and learn." The colonists tried to evacuate, but there were too many people and not enough ships. Families huddled in shelters as the bioships consumed entire cities above them. Children cried as their parents tried to explain why the sky was falling. It looked like the end for New Sol. But Admiral Junho-Oh had been waiting for this moment. For months, his 7th Fleet had been hiding in the outer system, using the same stealth techniques that made their ghost ships invisible. When the Iron Fist Fleet arrived, they focused entirely on the planet, assuming no human force could threaten them. They were wrong. "All ships, activate Rage Protocol," Admiral O commanded. "Let's show them what happens when you hurt our families." Dr. Myeon-an had once been a peace activist, organizing protests against Earth's military spending. The war had changed her. When she saw the footage of the destroyed research station, something inside her broke and reformed into something harder. The Rage Protocol was her masterpiece. An artificial intelligence system that didn't just control weapons, it learned from every shot fired, every tactic used, every mistake made. But more than that, it was designed to think like a human under extreme stress, creative, desperate, and absolutely ruthless. "Rage Protocol Online," reported Captain Seijin Park from the battleship Determination. "AI systems show full activation." What happened next shocked even the human crews. Their ships began moving in ways that defied normal tactics. Instead of forming battle lines, they scattered like a school of fish, then regrouped in patterns that seemed random, but were actually perfectly coordinated. The Rage Protocol AI systems were talking to each other faster than human minds could follow, sharing information and adapting strategies in real time. Every shot that missed was analyzed. Every successful hit was copied and improved. "Impossible," breathed War Marshal Drakthan as he watched his formations being torn apart. "Their ships are inferior. Their numbers are smaller. How are they doing this?" The answer was that the human ships weren't fighting as individual vessels anymore. The Rage Protocol had turned the entire fleet into a single thinking organism, one that learned and adapted faster than the Valith could react. When Valith ships tried to target human vessels, they found their targets had moved before the weapons fired. When they changed tactics, the humans had already predicted the change and countered it. When they tried to retreat, they discovered human ships had somehow gotten behind them. "Sir, we've lost 40 ships in the last 10 minutes, reported Drakthan's tactical officer. "Our weapons can't lock onto them." It's like they know where we're going to shoot before we do. That was exactly what was happening. The Rage Protocol had analyzed thousands of hours of Valith combat footage, identifying patterns in their tactics that even the aliens didn't know they had. Micro-expressions on their faces before giving orders, slight changes in ship position before firing, energy fluctuations that preceded weapons activation. The AI could literally predict what the Valith were going to do before they did it. But the most devastating surprise was yet to come. "Sir, multiple contacts approaching from the planet," reported the sensor officer. Drakthon looked at the display and felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Rising from Sol's surface were hundreds of ships, but these weren't military vessels. They were civilian craft. Cargo haulers, passenger ships, mining vessels, even personal yachts, all armed with whatever weapons the colonists could find or build. "This is Governor Soo-Hyun Lee of New Sol Colony," came a transmission from the lead ship. "You want to destroy our world? You'll have to go through us first." The civilian fleet was a suicide mission and everyone knew it. Farmers flying cargo ships against the Empire's most powerful warships. But they were buying time for the evacuation ships to escape with their families. More importantly, they were proving something to the galaxy. When humans were threatened, they didn't just rely on their military. Every civilian became a soldier. Every ship became a weapon. Every person became willing to die for their species' survival. The battle became a slaughter, but not the kind War Marshal Drakthon had expected. His bioships, designed to fight other military fleets, couldn't handle the chaos of hundreds of small ships attacking from every direction. Some were ramming his vessels directly. Others were using improvised weapons that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. Admiral O's fleet used the distraction to devastating effect. While the Iron Fist fleet tried to deal with the civilian ships, the military vessels struck at their command ships and supply vessels. "War Marshal, we need to retreat," his aide urged. "We've lost over half the fleet." Drakthon stared at the display showing the battle. His mighty Iron Fist fleet, the terror of the galaxy, was being destroyed by farmers and merchants. The species that was supposed to be exterminated was instead teaching the Empire a lesson in courage. "All ships, withdraw," he finally ordered. As his remaining ships fled the system, Drakthon sent one final transmission to New Sol. "This isn't over, humans. The Empire will return with greater force." Governor Soo-Hyun Lee's response was broadcast across the entire galaxy. "We'll be waiting." The Battle of New Sol changed everything. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Empire's most feared fleet had been defeated. Not by superior technology or greater numbers, but by the simple human refusal to give up. More importantly, the battle had been witnessed by species across the galaxy. The mighty Valith Empire could be beaten. The humans had proven it was possible. In hidden corners of 1,000 worlds, enslaved species began to whisper about hope. On Earth, President Cho received Admiral O's battle report with mixed emotions. They had won a great victory, but the cost had been terrible. Thousands of civilians had died defending their world, but their sacrifice had accomplished something more important than military victory. They had shown the galaxy what humanity was truly made of. The war was far from over, but something fundamental had changed. The Empire was no longer invincible, and everyone in the galaxy knew it. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. The Iron Fist fleet, terror of 1,000 worlds, had been destroyed by humans. Species that had been enslaved for centuries began to whisper in the darkness of their work camps and prison worlds. If the primitive humans could defeat the Empire's best fleet, maybe freedom was possible after all. On the prison world of Cathara, a Morgoth slave named Vexhal heard the news from a smuggled transmission. His people had been conquered 800 years ago. For 30 generations they had served the Empire without hope of escape. Now, for the first time in centuries, Vexhal dared to dream of rebellion. Similar conversations were happening on thousands of worlds across Valith space. The Empire's greatest weapon had always been the belief that resistance was hopeless. The humans had shattered that belief in a single battle. Emperor Zethrak himself was furious. He paced the throne room of his palace on Valith Prime, his metallic skin glowing with rage. Reports of unrest were coming in from across the Empire. Slave revolts on 12 worlds, production slowdowns on dozens more. Even some of their client species were questioning their loyalty. "This cannot continue," the Emperor declared to his council. If we do not crush these humans completely, our entire empire will collapse. High Admiral Korath stepped forward. He was ancient even by Valeth standards, having served the Empire for over 3,000 years. Your Majesty, perhaps we should consider negotiation. The humans have proven more resourceful than expected. Negotiation? Zethrak's voice could have melted steel. The Empire does not negotiate with insects. Ready the Annihilation Armada. I will lead it myself. The Annihilation Armada was the Empire's ultimate weapon. 1,500 of their largest and most powerful ships, equipped with planet-killer weapons that could turn entire worlds into cosmic dust. It had only been used 3 times in the Empire's history, when species had proven too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Prepare the stellar destroyers, the Emperor commanded. When I am finished, there will be no trace that humanity ever existed. Not a single planet, not a single moon, not even their sun will remain. But while the Empire prepared for total war, humanity was planning something that no conquered species had ever attempted before. General Sunho Park stood in the war room deep beneath Seoul, surrounded by holographic displays showing the entire galaxy. His team had been working for months on what they called Operation Checkmate. It was so ambitious that even human military leaders had initially called it impossible. The Empire has over 3,000 worlds, he explained to President So-hee Yang, who had taken office after President Cho's death in a Valeth bombing raid. But their command structure is incredibly centralized. Everything flows through 47 key worlds that control communications, logistics, and military coordination. Dr. Ariam Lee, the operations chief architect, activated a detailed map of Valeth space. Red lines showed the flow of information and resources throughout the Empire. Blue dots marked the critical control points that kept the massive civilization functioning. If we can strike all 47 targets simultaneously, she continued, we can cause a cascade failure in their entire system. Their ships won't be able to communicate with each other. Their supply lines will collapse. Their local commanders won't know what orders to follow. President Yang studied the display. The plan was breathtaking in its scope. Instead of fighting the Empire's military might directly, humanity would attack its nervous system. How many ships do we have for this operation? She asked. Every vessel we can find, replied Admiral Ji-hyun Ko. Military ships, converted civilian craft, even the training vessels from our academies. About 800 ships total, spread across 47 strike teams. The numbers were still terrifying. 800 human ships against an empire of 3,000 worlds. But General Park had learned something important from studying the Empire's history. They've never faced a coordinated multi-system attack, he explained. Every species they've conquered fought defensively, trying to protect their homeworlds. We're going to do the opposite. We're going to attack everywhere at once. The preparation took 3 months. Human engineers worked around the clock to prepare ships for the longest military operation in their species' history. Dr. Song's research teams identified the exact locations of critical Empire facilities. Cryptographer Woojin Kim developed new methods to disrupt Valeth communications on a galactic scale. Most importantly, Commander Sang Hyun-yoon's intelligence network had grown into a galaxy-spanning operation. Human agents, working with sympathetic members of enslaved species, had mapped out the Empire's vulnerabilities in incredible detail. The beauty of the plan, Dr. Lee explained to her team, is that the Empire's size works against them. They're so big that they can't respond quickly to multiple threats. By the time they figure out what we're doing, it will be too late. Meanwhile, Emperor Zethrik was approaching the Sol system with the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. The Annihilation Armada stretched across millions of kilometers of space, a metal storm that could darken the stars themselves. Prepare the planetary destroyers, he commanded as Earth came into view. I want every human world turned to ash. Then destroy their sun. Let there be no trace that this species ever existed. But as his weapons charged for the final attack, reports began flooding in from across the Empire. Valeth Prime was under attack. The shipyards of Korvac were burning. The communication hub at Centauri had gone silent. Rebellion was erupting on dozens of worlds simultaneously. Impossible, breathed the Emperor. How can they be attacking our core worlds? Their entire fleet is here in this system. High Admiral Korath studied the incoming reports with growing horror. Your Majesty, these aren't the same ships. Somehow the humans have launched simultaneous attacks across our entire territory. On Earth, Admiral Ko watched the tactical displays with grim satisfaction. Operation Checkmate was working exactly as planned. Across the galaxy, human strike teams were hitting their targets with devastating precision. Captain Dong Hae Shin's team had destroyed the main communication relay at Valeth Prime itself, cutting the Emperor off from half his empire. Lieutenant Colonel Nayan Park's forces had captured the industrial complex at Moldavar, shutting down production of military supplies. Commander Seokjin Moon had led a daring raid on the prison world of Cathara, freeing thousands of enslaved beings who immediately joined the rebellion. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. The enslaved species, inspired by humanity's example, were rising up everywhere at once. Centuries of oppression exploded into violence as the Empire's slaves turned on their masters. "Sir, we're receiving reports of rebellion on over 400 worlds," Admiral Ko's aide reported. "The Morgoth have seized control of their home system. The Kelthani have destroyed 3 Valeth fleets. Even some of the client species are declaring independence." Emperor Zethrak stared at the reports flooding his command center. His mighty empire, built over 12,000 years, was collapsing in a matter of hours. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were breaking their chains. Client worlds that had served the Empire faithfully were declaring independence. His own forces were scattered across the galaxy, unable to respond to the chaos. "How?" he whispered. "How did primitives accomplish this?" The answer was simple, though the Emperor would never understand it. Humanity hadn't tried to match the Empire's strength. Instead, they had turned the Empire's greatest advantage into its greatest weakness. The vast size and complexity that had made the Valeth invincible had become the instrument of their destruction. More importantly, humans had done something no other species had managed in 12,000 years. They had inspired hope in the hearts of the enslaved. They had shown the galaxy that the Empire could be beaten. As his annihilation armada prepared to destroy Earth, Emperor Zethrak realized that the war was already lost. Even if he killed every human in the galaxy, the damage was done. The Empire would never recover from this day. But Admiral Ko wasn't finished yet. As the Valeth weapons charged for their final attack, she gave the order that would end the war. "All ships implement Protocol Omega. It's time to finish this." 6 months later, the galaxy looked completely different. Where once the Valeth Empire had ruled with absolute power, now dozens of free worlds flew their own flags. The great rebellion that humanity had started had spread like wildfire across 3,000 star systems. President So-hee, Yang stood on the bridge of the new space station orbiting Earth. Through the massive windows, she could see ships from 23 different species docked at the station's ports. Morgoth cruisers floated next to human destroyers. Kelthani science vessels shared space with Centauri cargo haulers. All of them flew the same new flag, a simple design showing stars connected by lines of light. The Galactic Freedom Alliance had been born from the ashes of the Empire's collapse. "Madam President, the Valeth delegation has arrived," announced Admiral Dong-hyuk Moon, humanity's new chief military strategist. His uniform now bore the insignia of the Allied Defense Force, a military organization that included soldiers from dozens of worlds. Yang nodded. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. After 12,000 years of tyranny, the Valeth Empire was finally ready to surrender. The delegation that entered the conference room was a shadow of the proud aliens who had first demanded humanity's submission. Emperor Zethrak looked old and tired, his metallic skin dull and cracked. Behind him walked the few remaining high officials of what had once been the mightiest empire in galactic history. "Your Majesty," Yang said politely, gesturing to the chairs around the conference table. "Please sit." Zethrak's eyes burned with hatred, but he sat down without speaking. Around the table, representatives from the freed species watched him with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely controlled rage. Many of these beings had spent their entire lives as slaves under Valeth rule. Dr. Hayan Bey, now humanity's chief diplomat, opened the negotiations. She had been a university professor before the war, teaching ancient history. Now she was making history herself. "The terms are simple and non-negotiable," she began, activating a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Red areas marked what remained of Valeth territory. Green areas showed the worlds that had declared independence. All military operations will cease immediately. All enslaved populations will be freed without condition. Full independence will be granted to every species that requests it. Her voice was calm but firm. These are not requests. These are the terms of your surrender. Emperor Zethrak finally spoke, his voice cracking with emotion. You cannot enforce such terms. We still control 800 worlds. Our remaining fleets number in the thousands. General Kyungsoo Lim leaned forward from his seat. He commanded the Allied Defense Force, a military organization that now included warriors from 40 different species. Your Majesty, shall we demonstrate what we can enforce? The holographic display changed, showing real-time images from across the galaxy. Velith worlds under blockade by Allied fleets, rebellions erupting on planets still under Empire control, former slave worlds now armed with weapons captured from Velith armories. Your remaining territories are completely surrounded, General Lim continued. Your supply lines are cut. Your communication networks are compromised. Half of your remaining worlds are in open rebellion. The only reason we haven't already conquered your core systems is because we're trying to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Dr. Bay activated another display, this one showing casualty figures from the war. In 18 months of fighting, you've lost over 2 million military personnel. We've lost fewer than 50,000. Your tactics, designed for fighting primitive species, are completely useless against modern warfare. What she didn't mention, but everyone in the room knew, was that humanity had revolutionized galactic warfare. The tactics and technologies developed during the human rebellion were now spreading throughout the Alliance. Future wars would never again follow the predictable patterns that had served the Empire for so long. But we're not here to gloat about military victories, Yang interjected. We're here to build a better future for every species in the galaxy. She activated a new display showing the proposed structure of the Galactic Freedom Alliance. Unlike the Empire's rigid hierarchy, the Alliance was built on principles of cooperation and mutual respect. Every species will have representation in the Alliance Council. Trade will be conducted on equal terms. Scientific knowledge will be shared freely. No species will ever again be subjected to slavery or forced labor. Emperor Zethrak stared at the display with disbelief. You would give equal voice to species you could easily dominate? Humans now have the strongest military in the galaxy. You could rule us all. President Yang smiled sadly. Your Majesty, that's exactly why we won't. Humans learned long ago that empires built on domination eventually collapse. We're building something different, something that will last. Admiral Moon stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the docking bays. Look out there, he said. Morgoth engineers working alongside human technicians. Kelthani scientists sharing research with Zentari doctors. Former enemies becoming friends and allies. He turned back to face the Velith delegation. That's our strength. Not fear or intimidation, but cooperation. Every species brings something unique to the Alliance. Even yours, if you choose to join us peacefully. The room fell silent. The offer was more generous than anyone had expected. The humans weren't demanding revenge for the attempted genocide. They weren't seeking to enslave the Velith as the Empire had enslaved so many others. They were offering partnership. High Admiral Korath, one of the few Velith military leaders who had survived the war, whispered something to his emperor. Zethrak's expression changed from anger to confusion, to something that might have been hope. What guarantee do we have that you won't simply turn on us once we're defenseless? Zethrak asked. Dr. Bay smiled. The same guarantee you gave to every species you conquered. None at all. You'll have to trust us, just as you forced others to trust you. The difference, though no one said it aloud, was that humanity had already demonstrated their character. When they could have exterminated the Velith, they chose mercy. When they could have enslaved their former oppressors, they offered freedom. The final term, General Lim announced, is territorial. The Velith Empire will withdraw to its original 12 worlds. The planets you occupied before your expansion began 12,000 years ago. Any Velith military forces found outside that boundary after 1 year will be considered hostile. 12 worlds? Zethrak's voice was barely a whisper. You're reducing us to 12 worlds? 12 worlds is more than most species have, Yang replied. It's more than you left to the species you destroyed. And it's 12 more worlds than you deserve after what you've done to the galaxy. The Emperor looked around the room at the faces of the species he had once ruled. Some showed anger, others pity, but none showed fear. The myth of Velith superiority was completely dead. If we refuse these terms? He asked quietly. Admiral Moon's answer was simple and direct. Then the war continues until there are no Valeth left to refuse anything. The silence stretched for long minutes. Outside the windows, ships from dozens of worlds continued their peaceful work, building the future of the galaxy together. Finally, Emperor Zethrak spoke the words that ended 12,000 years of tyranny. The Valeth Empire accepts your terms. Dr. Bay nodded and began preparing the surrender documents, but President Yang had one final thing to say. Your Majesty, the Alliance will be monitoring your territories for the next century to ensure compliance with these terms. But we hope that someday, when you've proven that you can live peacefully with your neighbors, you might consider joining the Alliance as equals. Emperor Zethrak looked up in shock. Even after everything, the humans were offering his people a path to redemption. As the former emperor signed the surrender documents, ending the longest and most brutal empire in galactic history, Yang reflected on how far humanity had come. 2 years ago, they had been a small species taking their first steps into the galaxy. Now they were the founders of a new age of freedom and cooperation. The galaxy was finally free, and it would never be enslaved again. Outside the station, ships from 100 worlds worked together to build a better future. The age of empire was over. The age of alliance had begun.